Everybody, it is August 5th, 2025, and I'm here with your after hours recap. So, the market at this juncture kind of just doing a little bit of what I expected, which is just digest and consolidate. I don't think it's doing anything wrong necessarily. You had two pretty ugly down days on Thursday and Friday last week, followed by a massive breadth expansion yesterday. And to me, it was just kind of, if you looked under the surface and you looked at names like AEVA or QS or Archer on the growth side, or obviously a coin, a BMNR, a CoreWeave, just effectively around the board, even some semiconductors like ASML, things had really just been either pulling back, again, Duolingo, Netflix, Spotify, you name it, the list is long. Under the surface, there had been some deterioration, and there still is. And then really this earnings season has kind of been, I would say, hit or miss, right? There have been some names that have been acting really well. One of them notably on my screen in A-Lab and A-Net. Those are acting like leadership. Something like Reddit, obviously a gap up in Palantir. So there are some things that are acting well. On the flip side, you've had Amazon come down, you've had Apple act fairly poorly, you had AMD gap down on earnings, you had a pretty massive rejection on HIMSS today, along with the gap down. You had SMCI down, and you had Coin recently down, you had MSTR down. So just the market, like I said, for the last few weeks, and now that we're kind of in the middle of earnings season, is just kind of differentiating what names are really working well and what names not so much. A few more LEU, really nice with the gap up today. BWXT, another one, really nice winner, and continuation in after hours with a small little gap up. Beautiful move out of this consolidation. Nice to see, kind of in that nuclear space, LEU as well. So, there are your haves, there are your have-nots, there are names gapping down, there are names that have earned themselves a pullback and some digestion, maybe an AMD fairly notable as one of those. And even today, I thought maybe a Palantir was, and it kind of did, at one point today, was going to act a little bit like a Roblox on the gap up for earnings. And not to say that there's anything wrong with what a Roblox is doing. It did kind of go ahead and fill in the gap off of the gap up. But it had just been in such a massive move up. Guys, I said it over the weekend, like, where are the 5 clean bases? Where are the, not even 5 clean bases? Where are the names that can actually drive the market higher? Where are those clean bases? The reality is that we just still don't have them. We need a little bit more digestion. Yes, there are individuals performing really well. Again, notably a Palantir, an LEU, a BWXT, now an A-Lab, an A-Net, a CLS, right? There are names out there if you kind of go. And then, when you talked about it, I mentioned it, I think it was on August 1st, and I said, the nicest base in the market is gold, right? And then notably, gold miners yesterday and today, absolute rockets. Look at a GFI. Just a huge move, and what do you get, right? You've had a really nice move up, a long consolidation, and just sideways digestion, let the 50 catch up, let everything get tight, and then an explosive breakout. And it's not the only one. So that's how you know that the move is real. AEM, WPM. So, you're getting some follow through with the group, FNV, Franklin, Nevada. So you're getting some follow through from the group. In my opinion, gold miners, this move is real. I don't know how much longer it lasts. Kind of when I look at gold, and you think about the digestion here, we haven't even really broken out yet. So my expectation is, do we get to 36, 3,700, something like that for gold? These gold miners are definitely going to follow through in that kind of scenario. What does that mean for, other kind of growthy names? I don't have any clue. What I've been saying for the last few weeks is, really, even with the down move in the Russell, is I think that short QQQ along the Russell, just based on positioning alone, is probably a pretty good trade all on its own. Long gold here still seems like pretty good, but obviously the breakout was yesterday. like I said, WPM, AEM, GFI, KGC, NEM, AU. The list goes on and on for breakouts within that sector. And normally, I mean, even EGO, I mean, just awesome moves all around the gold space. And again, some of them reported really nice earnings on their own. But obviously, as gold appreciates the way it has, the thing that they dig up out of the ground, it's not like their employees have gotten that much more expensive, or the overhead to mine gold has gotten that much more expensive. So they are effectively printing, 50% more money than they were just a year ago. So just something to keep in mind if gold does continue higher. And like I mentioned, there are not really a ton of clean bases out there. There are some things that are working higher. Obviously, I'm still long Oklo. Really beautiful move there today. You're starting to get some pretty big underperformance in an SMR, which is a bit shocking considering how well this thing was acting. Pretty big rejection here today. Didn't quite close on those highs. Didn't even close the gap. Don't necessarily know what's going on there today, but doesn't really matter to me personally. I do own Oklo, so I could care less what an SMR is doing. But for the most part, the group is acting pretty well. CCJ continues to act well. BWXT, obviously, one we mentioned. CEG, GEV, VST also continue to act pretty dang awesome. And then it's just been a pretty divided up earnings season. Like I said, you had this big gap up in a Microsoft as well. And I didn't think that this did anything wrong per se, right? We're still technically above the 5-day moving average. This is just how monster of a trend this thing has been. And then you get the gap up on earnings, and it just kind of gives it back. There's really no more juice left. When I talk about what has digested or consolidated long enough, normally things make really nice moves from long consolidations. Hence, the gold miners are working as well as they are because a GFI had a pretty big base. And that's the kind of powerful move you can get from a base. But when Microsoft is gapping up, no base, already just in a, kind of a frozen rope pattern, you're not going to get the kind of, the push that you'd be hoping for. And, if people are buying that gap up, I think it's completely silly. SoFi, Roblox, those have been doing the same thing. And then obviously recently, if names are gapping down on earnings, I'm not going to compare AMD to QS. AMD has earned the right to take a breather. But, SMCI down, AMD down, some semiconductors haven't been acting the best. I know A-Lab's been acting, pretty decent. But recently, AVGO doing a bunch of nothing, which, by the way, a bunch of nothing is completely healthy. CRDO, a bunch of nothing. But there are some that are acting a little bit worse than others. Obviously, TSM, just a slightly bit worse. Wouldn't say anything terrible, but, a bit steeper of a pullback. I don't think anything wrong. I think this name has earned the right to go sideways for a little bit. But the further you look, there are some names that are kind of breaking down. ASML, which I consider to be a great company, kind of breaking down. Intel, which has been a dog this entire time. Update today, but below the 200 simple moving average, continues to be a dog. When this thing gets moving, the year is 2030. So just kind of leave that one alone. And then I mentioned SMCI as well. Pretty nasty move down in after hours right now. So all the way down to the 50 simple moving average. And this is, partially why I do like to make sure that I do peel into strength. I don't ever like to carry the full balance into earnings. And, fortunately, I did take some off of toast on, what day was this? The 29th. Dealt with some pretty big volatility in after hours, which is completely fine. And we'll see kind of what hangs in there for tomorrow, what continues to roll over. What I know is that the market still continues, in my opinion, to need some digestion. We still don't have clean setups, and that's the most important part. The clean setups were in the gold space. So if you were there, congratulations. If you owned an A-Lab, around $100, congratulations. If you owned an ANET, I'm kind of kicking myself for not buying this ANET as it got over the 200 simple moving average in here, or not buying it out of this little small consolidation, $204. I felt like this one would play out similar to CLS, and rightfully so. This name is awesome, and a CLS and an ANET, they just are playing out in very similar fashion, where it breaks the highs and then it's got some more juice. I would expect ANET to be able to do something very similar over the coming weeks or months. I think that's got that kind of potential. So one I'll definitely monitor going forward. Stocks that are gapping up on earnings are at my forefront. Stocks that are gapping down on earnings, if the market comes under pressure, those are the names that I potentially want to short. And I said it the other day, in Amazon, when you get a gap down like this on earnings, I don't want to try and cherry pick a bottom. Right, guys? When you lose the 50 simple moving average like this, how do you know that you can't continue to roll over like a Netflix? How do you know that you won't really get destroyed like Duolingo when you lose your 50 simple? When you lose your 50 in here, and then you're like, it's just losing its 50, no big deal. Okay, well, it ends up getting much worse if you stay stubborn. So when something loses the 50, I don't want to stay stubborn with it. I don't want to assume it's going to come back to life. When you gap down on earnings like this, and you're below the 50, or you gap through the 50 on earnings, I've said it before, none of us know that if you gap down and lose the 50 on earnings, that you don't end up looking like deck by the end of the quarter. And that's the last scenario I ever want to put myself in, or stress myself over. As soon as you gap down and you're losing the 50, I'm out of there. I don't think twice. Shoot first, ask questions later. Always focus on things that are going up if you're long bias. If the market comes under pressure, there are definitely names that I think are targetable on the short side. Something as simple as HIMS. You thought this thing was, oh man, it's pushing great, it's trying to go green, and then to the T basically tries to go green and completely just rejects all day long. Any pushes on this thing, I would suspect they stay heavy, and we probably get some more rollover. Forget the volume that came in here today. It might look good, like it was some kind of a great day, but it was absolutely terrible for this name. Just complete selling once you had that morning push, and this is no good. So, there are some names that are targetable on the short side if the market begins to show some distribution. There are some names that are acting like leadership quality. There are names that I believe are still leadership quality, like an AMD, that have earned the right to pull back, digest, take a breather. I mean, the thing is up like 80 points in 3 months. I didn't think earnings were killer. I didn't think they were bad. I don't necessarily love the semi sector right now. I think the semi sector is kind of too bifurcated for me to really get interested in it at the moment. So, there are still some things that look good. There are still some things that, could potentially break down further. So we've got two sides of the market. Obviously, Hood, I think, is hanging in there really, really nicely after its earnings. Continues to digest, goes sideways. And while the market does nothing, this name effectively does nothing, which is exactly what I wanted. Allows moving averages to catch up, allows everything to tighten back up, and then, once the market gives us, a follow-through day in spirit, as they like to say, then we can go ahead and come in for a few more of these names and try to get ourselves positioned. So, not really much else coming to mind. You're still getting some unwind, and by the way, software names still continue to act like crap. You had a gap up in NOW on earnings. You have completely given that up, and you are continuing lower, right? The market hasn't even pulled back yet, and a name like NOW is rejecting the 200, starting to live underneath it. Cybersecurity names, whether you're talking about a name like Crowd, living under the 50. And guys, I'm not trying to compare a Crowd to a Duolingo or a Netflix, but when you break the 50 simple moving average and you start to live underneath it, caution. And leaders from early on in the year, really from April, whether it's a CrowdStrike or Rubrik or even an Uber, right? Netflix. Some of these things are just struggling a little bit. I even noticed SE struggling a little bit. This is not what I want to see out of SE. Yes, you still have some earnings coming up. Again, I don't want to jump to any assumptions, but things that are gapping up on earnings and holding in there well, even a Reddit has my attention on the long side. ANET has my attention on long. Anything gapping up on earnings and then holding, ideally the market undergoes some more distribution, and then these names will stand out even more. They'll just build a 3 weeks type pattern, while the market comes under some pressure. That would be the most ideal case scenario going forward. And then we've got a bundle of future leaders, whether it be, like I said, a Reddit, maybe continuation in Palantir, an AMD, a CLS, Corning. There's a ton of names out there that just look still fantastic. So you guys kind of know my opinions. You guys know how I feel here. If you also own some gold names, congratulations. That is the sector at the moment to be in. I talked about it a few days ago. It was the best base in the market, and stocks are acting accordingly when you have a big base in the market. So really nice to see that working out for all the gold bulls. Congratulations. On the flip side of that, recent IPO names, Fig, getting absolutely bamboozled, totally smoked, oversubscribed turd. That's just getting, it's learning what gravity is all about, according to Newton's whatever law. And then you've got Circle still coming under some real pressure, so stable coins aren't very stable. And then CoreWeave getting unwoven. So we've got some IPOs coming under pressure. You've got Bitcoin looking fairly poor. You got Coin really getting destroyed after earnings, and really even before that. You've got MicroStrategy looking pretty terrible. So, those are kind of my opinions here. Software stocks look rough. Cybersecurity stocks are looking pretty rough. Semiconductors are pretty bifurcated group, and gold's leading the way. So, take that as you will. And I will see you guys all bright and early for pre-market prep tomorrow. Cheers.